Hello and welcome to the MNJK Technology channel. Today we have an exciting project to share with you guys. Say you're out on a business trip and you need a file off your Linux server back home. You could always FTP in, but maybe you don't like leaving it on all the time since it can pose a security risk. What if you could turn on your FTP service remotely from a web interface and then turn it off when you finished? Or say you're working with people who are not particularly CLI savvy. What if you need them to run a script you prepared? Wouldn't it be cool if they could just log into a website and click a link to run that script? Today we're going to show you how you can build a Python web application that will let you control a Linux server by simply logging in and clicking a link. The technologies we're going to leverage are Flask and Netmiko. Flask is a web application framework. It's lightweight and easy to get started with. It's also powerful. Netflix, Airbnb, and Reddit all make use of it. It lets you create dynamic websites that run logic underneath to provide exactly the content you want to display. Netmiko is a Python library that makes it simple to log into a remote device like a router, switch, or server and run commands as if you're on that device's CLI. It uses SSH, so the connection is encrypted and secure. So let's get started.
In order to do this project, you're going to need some hardware and some software resources. Let's start with the hardware. We recommend deploying the app on one machine and using it to access a second machine. If you have two Linux machines, or a Windows machine and a Linux machine, that'll work out great. If you have a Mac and a Linux machine, some of the steps will be different, but you should be able to get it to work. If you only have one system available, we recommend running the app on a Linux virtual machine. For the purpose of this demonstration, we're going to show you how to do it on a Windows machine and a Linux VM running Debian. For software, there are only three major packages you'll need. First, you want to download Python 3. Links are down below in the description. Second, you'll need some place to write and test your code. MNJK recommends PyCharm Community Edition. Links are down below. And that's what you'll see in the rest of this video. If you have an editor you prefer, like Visual Studio or even Notepad, you can use those as well. If you choose another editor, you're going to also need to make sure you have access to pip3 in order to download and install some required modules. Next, we're going to use PyCharm to set up a virtual environment and download the Python modules we need to make this all work. Once you have PyCharm open, first you'll go to File, then New Project, and put in a good name for your project. We're calling ours Remote Linux. You can leave the rest of the options as they are, but make sure your base interpreter is pointing at Python 3, which you installed earlier. PyCharm will automatically make the virtual environment for you when you create your project. In PyCharm, go to the Project Settings and choose Python Interpreter. Down at the bottom of the screen, you should see a plus button, so go ahead and click that. The packages you're going to want to search for and install are Flask, WT Forms, Flask WTF, and Netmiko. Now let's get coding. You're going to need to make 4 files for this application. The first 2 files will be Python files created in the project folder, main.py and forms.py. The second 2 files we will want to place in a directory called templates. We will create the folder by right-clicking on the project and selecting New, then Directory. Each of the following files can be created here. We'll create an index.html file, as well as a login.html file. All the code will be listed in the comments below, so feel free to pause the video and copy all of the code into the specified files. Otherwise, We also have a GitHub repository for this project, and you can clone it from the link in the description. Now, let's take a look at the code in detail. First, we import our modules. Next, we need some basic configuration to make Flask work. The next line is needed to be able to log in. You can set the secret key to whatever you would like. It is used to decrypt the secure cookie on the local machine, so in our environment, it's not super important. Now, we're ready to set up some views. Views are the different pages on our website. For the first one, we're going to build our index view. Inside of that, we need a function we called index. For now, we'll jump to the end. We want it to return the index.html file we're about to create, so we'll use this line of code. Now, let's go look at that index.html file. The first thing we want to do is check and see if we're logged in, so that's what we'll do with these lines of code. If we're not logged in, we want to go to our login page, and now we're done with our if statements, so we end the if statement with end if. Now we're going to add some links on our page to the commands we want to run on our Linux system. None of this is going to work yet if we don't have a way to log in, so let's go back to our main Py file and see how the logins were set up. First, we call up the form itself and create a dictionary using the entries in that form. Next, we use the Flask session module to turn that into a cookie on the local browser. If all that worked, we return to the index page, but now it will show we are logged in instead of taking us to the login page. Now, we're going to need that forms.py file to bring up our form. Once again, we'll need to import some packages. Next, we define a class called signin using the Flask form module with attributes username, password, and IP address. We use the validators package to tell the form that the data is required before it will accept the form. We're going to also need an HTML page for the login. The code for each form looks pretty similar to this. We specify what variable the code that goes into that form field and set the maximum size to 32 to prevent buffer overflows. Alright, logging in works now, but we should also add a way to log back out. Back to the main Py file. This view uses flask.session.pop to destroy the cookie that we made earlier and take you back to the login screen. The next thing we need to do is add some code to the index view that will check if the login exists. This will automatically redirect us to the login screen if there is no saved session information. Now, let's do our hello world. At the bottom of the main Py file, you can see the hello world view. First, it sets the existing session to a variable called s. Next, the dictionary is converted into a dictionary that Netmiko can use. Next, we connect using Netmiko, which uses SSH to connect to the external virtual machine. And this command runs the actual code on that remote system. Finally, this return command uses a simple HTML script to turn that output into a web page. Now, we're finally ready to test our code. To do this, we need our Linux VM, so if you haven't set one up and got it running, go do that and come back. We can actually run our app directly from the PyCharm terminal. We use the first command so that Flask knows what our app is named. Next, we start up the Flask server and use the host 0.0.0.0 so that we can log into the web browser from any machine on our local network. Now your server is running, so open up a web browser and navigate to 127.0.0.1 port 5000 or your IP address with port 5000 at the end. You should be taken to the login screen where you need to enter the username, password, and IP address of the Linux system you want to run the commands on. Please note this web app is running in HTTP, not HTTPS, so your password will be traveling over the wires unencrypted. You've been warned. When you're redirected to the main page, click on the Hello World and see if you did everything right. You should see the Hello World message from your Linux machine. Now, there are easier ways to get Flask to do Hello World, so let's do something that it can only do over SSH. We're going to run ls on your Linux machine. That output doesn't look great, but it is all there. For a challenge, see if you can get it to print each entry on a different line. So, now that we've got our app up and running, what do we do now? The first thing we recommend is experimenting with other Linux commands or even scripts. Once you've got your app doing all the commands you want it to run, do some research and see if you can get the program to run sudo commands. Next, experiment with error handling. What happens if you mistype your username, your password, or IP address? Once you've got your app working well, try setting up gUnicorn or another server more scalable than the built-in Flask server to run your app. Finally, set up Docker and upload your web app to Docker Hub to deploy it easily on any machine. Thanks to Miguel Grinberg and the Flask mega tutorial where we learn much of what we know about building Flask web apps. Our code follows many of the examples in the tutorial, and we are extremely grateful for this resource. That's all for this video. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like below. You can also leave a comment or ask a question down below. If you got stuck, please let us know and we'll try to walk you through that section. Thank you all for watching this video all the way to the end, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.